Good morning, Kemas. Thank you for joining us today. So, before we start, maybe you would like to briefly introduce yourself and also your company.
Sure. Thank you, Eva. So my name is Kemas Adrian, and I'm environmental manager for Pertamina Hulu Indonesia. So Pertamina Hulu Indonesia itself is an upstream oil and gas company that manage a portfolio of upstream assets in all Kalimantan Island with production around 65,000 barrels oil per day and
Mm,
625 million scf cubic feet per day of gas production. And then the
mm,
product, the oil and the gas itself directly enter the downstream industry that located in Kalimantan Island, either go to refinery for all of our oil and the LNG plant for all of our gas.
mm. Wow,
Yep.
thank you. Thank you for the introductions.
Yep.
And I understand you have been with Pertamina for some times, right?
Yep.
Because when I know you through Asia Tech, I think it was like many years ago.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I just want to ask you with these questions from your perspective, Kamas, what
Mhm.
are the key challenges currently shaping the decarbonization journey in the energy and downstream sector today?
So downstream and the energy sector, I
Right.
guess the key challenges, there are two challenges. The first one is the increasing of the needs of the energy. Either it is gasoline, diesel, or jet fuel that require the company like us expanding projects after projects just to meet the raising of energy demand.
Mm,
So more project means more carbon emitted to the atmosphere. So that's the challenge. We want to reduce the carbon itself. However, we are required to do more that will emit more carbon. So that's the challenge number one. The challenge
mm,
number two, for me, is the adoption of the high-tech solutions such as CCS, CCUS. It is very technologically viable. However, it requires a huge capitals then that it can make or break the economically of the project itself. So sometimes the mega project, it is economically doable, but when we put the high tech of carbon capture things like that, it become less economically viable. So sometimes it is harder for us to get a stable funding to the project that adapt to high tech technology that it can reduce carbon for sure. However, it requires, it is not cheap to execute that. So that's two main challenge, the increasing of energy, and the second one is huge capital of the high tech of carbon solution.
yeah. I totally agree with that,
Mhm.
especially the second part, second challenge. Funding, it's never easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's very good. I also want to ask to build on these questions. How do we keep the balance? Somehow we need to fulfill the net zero,
Yeah.
but the funding is getting more and more difficult or challenging. How are we supposed to keep the balance from your perspective?
From my perspective is there is no one single solution. So hybrid solutions is a must. I mean,
Mm,
sometimes we are polarized into one or two solutions only. So
mm,
as the oil and gas and energy practitioners, we must adaptive enough to understand the landscape of the surrounding environment. So we have to know about our climate,
mm,
access to capital, access to technology, surrounding environment, surrounding people, the local people, the biodiversity around us. So for example, if we are located in the forest area, I mean, the still relatively virgin forest area, if we want to force to implementing the high-tech project, it means that we have to land clear a lot of forest area, and it can make um, you know greater risk to the reputation of our business, right? But
right.
if we are choosing to focusing on our nature-based, for example, nature-based solutions that we can, for example, make a regreening of nearest sensitive but critical land, maybe it can culturally fit the solution. Meanwhile, we can also reduce carbon emitted from our project. So it depends, but my perspective is there is no one solution, and hybrid implementation is a must. Yeah.
Yeah, I see you just mentioned about the natural interventions, right?
Mhm, mhm.
So we are seeing the range of approaches being discussed, like you just mentioned, from technology-driven solutions to a nature-related interventions. How do you see this overall landscape evolving?
I think we as the industry, as the downstream and energy industry, we are being squeezed, squeezed by, for example, the financing access requires more and more cleaner technology, right? The
Mm,
financing agency want to see the commitment of management and the execution of how we can manage our carbon. But Eva, at the same time, economically challenges and then the environmental challenge, we also need to solve it. So from my perspective, that the landscape in the future, it will find its own balance. I mean, for example, uh, industry that located in the equator climate, such as Indonesia, Brazil, that have a lot of rains and we have a lot of forests, it will find the specific solution that may be only applied in those areas. It will be different in
mm,
Eastern Europe's, for example, where the climate is different and it is harder to invest in nature-based solution because the forestry may be not as as green as in Ecuador, for example. So the landscape right now would be each region will have their own solutions that fit for the regions only. Because sometimes like Indonesia, Brazil, probably Malaysia, Brunei, and things and countries in Ecuador area, they have the similarity of the environment, the similarity maybe of the culture of the people, and then the access, for example. So it will, it will go towards the balance from each region.
okay. Wow, that's interesting
Mhm.
to know. So I also see many organizations are making strong climate commitments,
Yeah.
but you see executions often prove more complex than expected. Where do you see the biggest gap between ambitions and real world implementations?
So basically, I agree with you that the top management commitments are all very strong. We heard it in a lot of media, and then we can see it in their sustainability reportings. We can access it. It is strongly mentioned over and over again. So I think the commitment is not the problem, but how to execute it. Like I said, sometimes we are polarized to one solutions. For example, the carbon capture and storage. That's a fantastic solution to absorb the carbon from the atmosphere and then we inject it to our reservoir beneath, or maybe we can use it as the utilization. We need to pressure maintenance or things like that for oil and gas, right?
Mm,
However, the challenge may be different. For example, in Indonesia, the technology of CCS CCUS, it requires a lot of imported technology from abroad, right? I mean, because we are mature in oil and gas, we are mature in downstream, but the new adapting technology such as CCS, it requires the technology transfer, and it is not easy because we have to send a lot of technologies from abroad to go to Indonesia, and it is not cheap.
mm,
And we go back to our first discussion. It is economically not viable to spend so much money, but at the same time, we try to make the project itself economically viable because the distance
mm,
between the technology, the source of technology, and the distance to our place where we want to install the technology is too far. Too far mean
mm,
costly. But maybe in the future, if the infrastructure, the technology access, for example, in Indonesia, we have a lot of place that used to make pipeline, for example, in Batam Island, platforms in Surabaya, for example. If those place can make the technology to support the CCS, CCUS, for example, the pipeline specific for CO2, and then things like that, the access is clearer, nearer, so the economical cost will be lower down. So basically, I agree with you. The commitment is no problem at all, but the access to high technology is still very costly, depends on the region. That's why maybe the solution is not one solution fits for all. Maybe in the place like Indonesia, for example, the CCS CCUS maybe will be a second or third solutions. The first one is the local solution, maybe nature-based. But the nature-based itself is still, people still not aware how to do a nature-based solutions well. Because sometimes when they think nature-based solutions, Eva, they just plant trees and then they count it. So it's not that easy, because we have to know the background of the area. If the area used to be forest and then we just do a land clearing and then we just put the new plants there, so it is not an effective nature-based solution, right? Because the baseline will be still
Right.
bigger than after our plantation growing well, right? So we need to know that in order to do a nature-based solution, we need to find the condition that initially already critical, so we can improve it. So that is what we call the net positive.
I know you will talk about these more in details
Yeah.
at Asia Tech. So I think it's going to be a very interesting topic for our audience. And moving on, Kemas,
Mhm.
looking ahead to Asia Tech 2026 in Bangkok, what key conversations or shift in thinking do you hope industry leaders will take away from this space?
So I think in the Asia Tech 2026, the diversity of solutions to reduce carbon, it depends on the regional characteristics. So I would like to industry leaders to understand that each solution shall be clearly defined, how it can both impact the environment, but it is also claimable in the world of trade. So I understand that sometimes our leaders think that the adoption of the CCS CCUS is the best technology, which is I agree, right? We have a system that can clearly understand how many carbon that we absorb, and we have the MRV, right? We have the monitoring and then verifications system. It is very established. However, because we have hit the wall of the financing, so not all of CCS CCUS solutions right now is economically viable, right? So that's why you mentioned before that the commitment is there, but the execution is still lacking. So that's why in the Asia Tech 2026, I hope that we can understand that each area, each continent, each regional has their own set of solutions. So we cannot use only one solution, but we can use hybrid solutions. We can use the strength of the region. If your region have a lot of sea, for example, micro hydro, probably the solutions. Maybe if you have a lot of sea, for example, you can use algae, to absorb the carbon, to replace the forest, If you live in the fertile soil, of course, you can plant a lot of trees that match the standard of NBS, nature-based solution. If you have a lot of wind, for example, maybe you can use wind turbine. So things like that shall be clearly defined, that each region has their own strength, and adopting the strength might be faster than if we want to adopt the technology that still costly.
Thank you so much. I can't wait for your presentations. and also the further discussions at the conference. So thank you very much, Kemas, for being here with us today. So I hope to see you in Bangkok and to further discuss these topics, and perhaps it will bring more insights to our audience, and also generate or fostering more conversations between Pertamina and also with our other key stakeholders.
Okay, Eva, thank you very much. Looking forward to see you in
Thank you.
Bangkok.
Yeah, I see you. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Have a nice day. Thank you.
Bye.